Hi, I'm John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the NAFI More Right Rudder podcast, the podcast for flight instructors on the go. And today is a special day because I have a special guest, a brand new author of The Pilot's Guide to Air Traffic Control. I'd like to welcome Andy Watson. Andy, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Andy is a air traffic controller, as you would expect. He's been doing that since 2006. He's worked with Cleveland, Chicago, Washington centers. He is a private pilot with an instrument rating, which gives him a interesting perspective on the air traffic control side, and he talks about that in the book. We'll talk about that a little bit later, too. He's a mission pilot for the Civil Air Patrol. And during his time in ATC, he's also participated in the Accident Investigation Daily Roundup meetings, which has given him an interesting perspective on some of the stories that he mentions in the book. So once again, Andy, I'm so glad you were able to carve out the time to talk to me today, and of course, our members and flight instructors out there. I do understand that to participate in this, you need to do a quick sort of air traffic control FAA disclaimer. Why don't you go ahead and get that out of the way, and then we'll chat.
Yep. So to make this legal, the opinions given in this, the opinions that I give are that of my own and not necessarily the same as the FAA.
Perfect. So, what did I miss? Tell me a little bit more about yourself and how this book came to be, and then we'll talk about a few of the stories that are contained within it.
Well, honestly, how it came about is I started doing some public speaking. I spoke at Oshkosh and Sun and Fun, and just a lot more stories came up when people were asking me questions about it and all that kind of stuff. And somebody mentioned that I should be writing a book and put them all in there. So that's essentially what I did.
Yeah, and you were generous enough to send me a book, and I've gotten a little bit into it, and I'm definitely going to finish it because it's something that I'm finding very interesting. It's nice to know from the pilot's perspective that the way that ATC works, and it's not quite as scary going, oh man, maybe. Am I going to get busted for this or that, or, whatever? You guys are friends, you're partners, right? Not adversaries, if I could say it that way.
One of my pilot friends, who is a former naval aviator, phrased it the best. He said that this book puts it into perspective that allows the pilot to add air traffic control as a part of their crew.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just a cool way to look at it, because that's exactly how it should be. I mean, we all are on the same team. Yeah, we have to do spacing and turn people out, but it's all to get everybody from point A to point B safely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's funny. You talk about spacing. I had a funny story that happened to me about a month ago. As pilots, we're impatient, right? We're always looking for shortcuts and short-term gains and stuff like this. And I was flying from Chicago to somewhere down in like the Charleston, South Carolina area. I think it might have been Charleston Executive. And I asked a controller, I said, hey, we've got a bit of a convoluted route here. Can I get a shortcut? And he said, yep, stand by. And about 5 minutes later, he hadn't come back, and he switched controllers. And so I asked the next one, like, hey, can I get a shortcut? And I think I upset him in some way, because our route, which was not the straightest of lines, but it was okay. He goes, yep, I've got a point for you. And he gives me this point, and it's like a 90-degree turn and then a 90-degree turn back. And, and I just went, I guess I'm not asking for shortcuts anymore. Is that a controller just having a bad day, or did I just do something I shouldn't have?
Well, I actually cover this in one of the chapters of the easiest way to get what you're looking for. But basically, what I tell people is, if you ask for a shortcut from one controller and you get switched, or especially if they say unable, don't ask the next controller, ask the one after that.
Oh.
So, and the reason why is because half the time we're sitting right next to each other. We if they say we have your request or something like that, they've already forwarded on. Traffic's not working for whatever reason, to just allow them to give it to you. Or sometimes it's a situation where the next controller already has the handoff on you, and I'm just waiting to change frequencies. It creates a lot more work for me to call that other controller unless they are sitting right next to me. and ask them if it's okay or whatever. Sometimes it's just forward your request to the next controller, and then once you get into their airspace, they do it. Or sometimes we call, say, hey, they're looking for a shortcut, your control, because that controller is not allowed to turn any aircraft while they're still in my sector. They have to wait for that airplane to get inside their sector.
Interesting.
So if you do that, that's the mechanics of how it works on our side of the world. So what I always say is, if you ask and they tell you no, or they don't even get back to you, maybe they're too busy to even worry about it, because shortcuts are the absolute last priority for us. Our priority is anything that has to do with safety or traffic, right?
Yeah.
So we got to keep everybody separated. Then we also keep everybody vectored away from the thunderstorms when they ask for it, and that kind of stuff. And then chop a shortcut just for a shortcut is my absolute last priority when I'm busy. Yeah. But when I can accommodate it, I'm all about doing it.
Is that like, does that create a lot of extra work for you guys? Is it, asking for a lot, or is it like, what is that? What happens on your end when we ask for something like that?
It all depends. If you are on the East Coast, like where I'm at Washington Center right now, our airspace is set up. We got queue routes that are like 8 miles separated with all the New England traffic going northeast bound, all of the Florida traffic, and all the DC guys heading southwest bound. So I always I work a lot of the Florida traffic coming out of DC. All those guys always want shortcuts, but if I give them a shortcut, it's going to be right in the face of all the guys descending for the DC area, and also the guys going to New York. So that most of the time I can't issue a much more than a few degrees, about 5-6 degrees of a shortcut in those situations, because I have to keep you spaced with everybody going the other way because of the climbing and descending traffic. Now, when everybody is all level, of course, we use right for direction at the centers all the time. The Tracons don't do it as much, especially down low, but so it's not a lost knowledge level, let's put it that way. So when everybody's level, it's a lot easier to give those shortcuts. But whenever you're dealing with climbing and descending traffic, that's why we have the routes. And really, these routes are all set up to keep everybody separated from each other. Mm-hmm. So when you're on the route, that's probably the safest place for you, to be honest with you, because then it's not abnormal, right? So, but no, if we can give a shortcut, we do. There's some controllers that like to sit down and give everybody shortcuts, but then they end up creating a lot of work for themselves at times. Other controllers prefer to leave it on the aircraft on routes because of the traffic that they have, and it just keeps everything a lot easier for everybody.
Sure. Now, I mean, your book is chock full of some really great stories. Like I said, I've really enjoyed reading the parts that I've read. For our audience, to give them sort of wet their whistle a little bit, okay. What's one of your favorite stories that you're maybe willing to share with the public before they have a chance to get your book?
One of the stories, actually, it's a spatial disorientation story. I went to the daily meeting, and there was we go through what they call the stack, and it's basically a stack of papers of all the accidents and the incidents from either the day or the weekend before. And as they're going through, there was a Pilatus PC-12 that departed out of an airport down in Texas. It was a Part 135 flight, and they were a medical flight. So they were repositioning to go pick up a patient. So they had a pilot, a flight nurse, and a flight medic on board. And let me rephrase this. I'm not going to say that this is my favorite story, because sadly, these people did not survive, and my heart goes out to them and their families. But I think it's one of the more important chapters for pilots to learn from, because they go out at 11:30 at night, they get dispatched out, they get in the airplane, they take off, I believe it's runway 4. And for noise abatement reasons, that's the calm wind runway. The controller tells them to turn right on course, which is like a 205-degree right turn. So it's a right turn, keep them east of the city. But the weather, and I forget exactly what the ceiling was, but it was low. It was like 800 feet overcast or something like that. So they depart out, they start the right turn. Well, the pilot did not put in the new beacon code. So the tower had a D-Bright, which is the radar in the tower cab that they can see, saw that they were squawking the wrong beacon code. So told him to confirm they're squawking the right one. So he changes it. The controller sees that on the radar scope and tells him to contact departure. Well, so he contacts departure while he's in a right bank angle, right hand turn, and he's climbing. The departure, he loses his beacon code altogether. So I don't know if he happened to hit the switch to turn it off as he was messing with things or what. So so as he's in this turn still, the controller tells him to recycle his transponder, so he does, and then he falls out of the sky, sadly. And so as we're sitting around this meeting, the one investigator says, of course, we're going to investigate this like we always do, but this sure does have all the earmarks of spatial disorientation. Now, at that point, this meeting probably has, I don't know, 15, 20 people in the room, and then they also have a speakerphone, and with people on there as well. And the one medical doctor, the flight surgeon, dials in he was out in Fort Worth. He dialed in every day, and he actually spoke up saying that this is exactly the scenario that they use in the FAA simulator called the Vertigon. And what the Vertigon is this box that on the inside has a flight deck mock-up. And so whoever the pilot or the student pilot, whoever you want to call it, gets in, closes the box. It's got a little TV screen on the front. And then the instructor gives commands through the intercom. So first thing they do is they get them going, and then they tell them to turn one direction or the other. And while they're in the turn, they give one of three instructions: to change your radio frequency, change your beacon code, or pick up a pin off the floor. And the reason why is because whenever you do not have visual reference to the horizon, so you're in the clouds and you're in a bank angle, one way or the other, doesn't matter which way, but anytime you're in the bank angle without reference and you move your head, no matter what it's for, but all three of those commands forces the person to move their head, 100% of the time that person will experience spatial disorientation. And as I'm sitting there, it just dawns on me that I learned about spatial disorientation when I was going through pilot training, but as a controller, we've never really been taught about it. That's not our job. It's the pilot and command's job to make sure that they maintain orientation and control of their aircraft. So therefore, what we recommend from that for the pilots is to, if you're ever in a bank angle, whatever you do, do not move your head when you're IMC. So that is key number one. Key number two, if air traffic control gives you the next instruction, because that's just what we naturally do, the most simple thing that you can do is just key your mic, which is always on your yoke as you're flying, right, on the control wheel, and just say unable or standby. I'm sorry, standby, not unable, but standby. And then once you go wings level, give yourself a couple seconds to make sure you're still good, and then say either repeat the clearance or do what they said. So I think that's one of the most important lessons that I tell in this book, just because there are a lot of deaths because of spatial disorientation, both for the pilots, both from the crew and the passengers' point of view. In fact, there's a FAA statistic that 90% of spatial disorientation accidents are fatal.
Oh,
so.
And, I don't want to get too heavy on this, but I know that everybody talks about when there's a accident, everybody talks about the people on board and the families and stuff like that. But it seems like one of the lesser talked about, possibly even ignored issues is what that does to controllers. I mean, you guys, that's got to take a toll. And is that, how is that dealt with?
Well, we have the same programs that like firefighters and police have available to them for the incident stress management or whatever it's called. Thank God I haven't had to deal with it personally. My heart just absolutely aches for the people that do go through that.
Yeah.
So it's just, and there's controllers that never recover. There's controllers that are able to get back from the job. But yeah, it's a very serious situation for all parties involved, of course, especially the ones that lose their lives, of course. But yeah, the people that a single accident affects is just, it's a lot larger than what most people would think.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I can't
I can't
imagine.
either.
On a lighter note, getting back to you and I had a conversation prior to this, and
Hmm.
as I said multiple times, boy, I really wish we had been recording this because we talked about some really cool things. Um, one of the things that we were chatting about was the pilot deviation story
Hmm.
or chapter. And
Yes.
some of the things from both a pilot's perspective and ATC's perspective of like how do these things happen. And you mentioned, how pilots can potentially land on other runways. And you said there was certain terminology that you guys are supposed to say. Like, what are these kinds of things? Because I'm not sure pilots understand that there's certain sort of key terms we should be paying attention to.
Yep. So basically, when we're talking about wrong surface operations, that's the technical name for landing on either a taxiway or the wrong runway. There was a student pilot that went out. They did for a solo flight out to the practice area. As they're coming back, going into an airport that has parallel runways. So he's coming back from the northeast and was told to expect the left side, which would be the side that they're favoring. And so he read that back and was told to report 3 miles out. So he does. And when he reports the 3 miles out, the controller says, okay, you're clear to land on the left side. Well, the pilot read back, clear to land on the right side. So he crosses final for the left runway, turns final. And as he's in the landing flare is when the controller could see exactly where he was positioned because they don't have radar there. And there was nobody else on the runway, so he just let him land because he figured it was safer. But what I've come about is I'm having conversations with some people. There's a psychologist that was in the office, and I was talking to her about this. And I don't have the specific study to reference, but basically what she told me was the human mind doesn't work. When that student pilot read back the right side instead of the left side, of course, we can hear it played as day on the tapes. But in the heat of in the situation, the human mind doesn't work in the aspect to catch those tiny little changes. So she said controllers are better than most because that's part of our job and that's what we listen for and we try to do it. But it's very easy. It goes against human nature for us to be trying to do that as the sole way to catch a problem, right? So if you as a pilot think you heard something different than you were told to expect, the towers are in the point 65, which is we call it the aim, but it's really a job order. And it tells us all the phraseology we're supposed to be using. The controllers are supposed to say, change runway 28 right, clear to land. If they don't say change runway, but you heard a different runway, ask them. The most simple thing that you can do, just say, you want us on the right side now instead of the left, or confirm the runway, or something. I think I'd probably say it more as, okay, so you want us to change to the other runway, because that will be the big red flag for them to hear. They'll come back, no, I want you on this side. So change runway is very key when it comes to that situation. And if you're ever unsure, don't just read back what you think. Make sure you say something in plain language to highlight the fact that you're looking at a bigger change here. Because if there was other traffic over there, that could be catastrophic.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to say that no matter how many hours you have, mistakes still happen. It's easy to sit on the ground and say, man, how did that bonehead do this? Or how did that person do that? But as you said, like in the heat of the moment, sometimes, your knowledge, it's not a skill-based thing. It can be a task saturation thing. It can be, you don't know what happened during that flight. They might be stressed out. It could be a student pilot. And I was actually involved in a research project in college that said something very similar to what you just mentioned, which is the more stress that you get as details start coming in, your frame of focus starts to collapse. And the very first thing that goes away is your ability to listen, your ability to hear. When you're focused on a approach and it's gusty and it's rainy and there's, possible wind shear and stuff like that, a controller can be screaming in your ear and there's a very real chance you may not hear any of it. And so unfortunately, these things do happen. And I can say on top of that, and I'll bring this back to sort of the flight instructor perspective, both this and sort of your previous point of like, controllers are here to help. They're our friends. controllers have probably saved my certificate multiple times. We were talking about a possible time where, how do people land on the wrong runway? And thankfully, I haven't done that. But I'll admit right here, right now, that I have lined up for the wrong runway before, to the point where, everybody says, well, if you're doing a visual approach, tune in the ILS frequency or load an approach or something like that. And that works great. But the human mind is a very interesting thing. There was one time, it was a night flight. We had tuned in the ILS and we had lined up for the runway. And I'm looking at it and I'm going, the ILS isn't lining up with this. And of course, instead of me going, well, hang on, maybe I'm lining up the wrong runway, I went, what's wrong with the ILS? Why is the ILS not working? This doesn't seem right. And and I think the controller was looking at it going, what the heck is he doing? And finally, they sort of just gave me this little poke that I needed. They're like, you sure you're lined up with runway so-and-so? And I look down and I look over and I go, nope. And I just kind of went, I think we might need to just go around. And I think the controller was relieved that that decision was made, but he saved my behind. For that and all the controllers that have been generous in asking me those pointed types of questions, that's very much appreciated from the pilot side.
Well, I don't know if you remember the Air Canada incident in San Francisco. That went around. They were lined up for the taxiway instead of the runway.
Oh no, I hadn't heard this one.
Yeah, it's actually one of the stories I tell ending this, and I interviewed the accident investigator in charge on this, and so basically, and this is a few years ago now, but at almost midnight, something like that. I could be off on the time, but they're coming in on the visual approach, and they shut down the left runway of the parallels for runway maintenance or construction. I'm sorry, it was a long-term thing. They were shutting it down for midnight shifts every night. Well, it was a crew from the East Coast of Air Canada. They're coming in. Their circadian rhythm is used to, it's like 3 a.m. their time with their body, and they've been sitting on reserve and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, it's just everything just kind of came together. It's the Swiss cheese model type thing. But basically, this visual approach, they go to the bridge and then they get to a certain point, and then they have to make their left turn and line up visually to the runway. They lined up for the taxiway because, of course, the left side being with the lights turned off, it actually at night, you had the two parallels is what it looked like. They were lined up for the right side. There were 4 heavies sitting waiting for departure. And I go into all the details on that, but it was a near miss. And from that, there's procedure changes that happened. They got rid of that approach, that visual approach, and changed that. And also they have made changes to the technology with the radar systems, and it gives at least at the major airports, I don't know how many of them are in there, but it also, there's an alarm that goes off if the airplane's not on center line anymore for the runway that it's programmed into going. So there's been a lot of changes, but it was very interesting seeing or hearing from the accident investigator that was a part of that. He actually got pictures the same time, 24 hours later. He was up in a helicopter and he was able to get some pictures and all that kind of stuff. And I do show that, and I will be showing that in my presentations, because you can't even see the 4 airplanes sitting there unless you're like really close looking at it. Because of course they're just sitting there with their navigation lights on. They haven't lit themselves up like a Christmas tree because they don't want to blind the pilots inbound. Right. So yeah, it was a near miss. It was there's like 5 different ways that they calculated what the actual distance was. I think they settled on, it was either 16 or 20 feet. They missed the second aircraft, the tail of the second aircraft by. But yeah, it was a pretty close one. But the flight crew initiated the go around, and like not even a split second later, the controller issued the go around as well. So both parties knew something wasn't going well, and luckily the pilots initiated it when they did, because if they would have waited to start the maneuver after the controller said it, they likely would have collided. Oh. But so it did get close. But yeah, it was a very interesting thing to learn about how easy it is to make that mistake.
Oh, it is. And aviation is about doing our best to mitigate mistakes, because pilots are pilots, controllers are controllers. We're all human beings. Mistakes are going to be made. And, it's cool that the FAA has sort of shifted policy a little bit to sort of understanding that people make mistakes.
Yep.
As long as, you don't do anything that is, completely negligent or any of that kind of stuff, or on purpose, right?
Malicious. Yeah.
So, we're trying to figure out, how do we spot these and how do we have the positive outcome? Because nobody wants anything, to go wrong.
Right.
Again, coming back to the flight instructor perspective, from a controller side, as a instructor, what kinds of things should we be telling our private pilot students about ATC? Like, what kinds of things can we tell them to sort of create long-term success for their ability to communicate with you guys, and also maybe be a little bit less afraid of talking on the radio?
Well, for the last part, muscle memory when it comes to talking on the radio is a real thing. It's not just truly the muscle memory of maneuvering your aircraft. It's practicing what you say. And all controllers talk too fast. We try not to. I've been accused of it myself, and I try to refrain from that. But at the end of the day, the reason why is because we're spitting out the same exact clearance time and time again. The only thing that changes is the call sign. So you get that heightened level of muscle memory of what you say and how you say it. It takes the stress out for that individual completely, because now you're just having conversation like you would if you're on the phone to whoever your best friend is. I won't say spouse, but whoever your best friend is on the telephone, right? So that would be first and foremost. And that's actually one of the things that I talk about from the spatial disorientation thing, going back to that. I would recommend flight instructors to put their students, when they, I know you only get a couple hours with the private pilot side, but you get more time to focus on it during instrument training, of having them say exactly what they would be telling air traffic control. I obviously don't hit the button, but if simulate what those communications would be between back and forth, and have them practice telling air traffic to stand by, because that's a pretty, when you're already intimidated by air traffic control, which most people are, at least for a while, that's a pretty big move to make, to tell air traffic to stand by. Well, if you need it, you need it. So that's one of the times that I actually say that. And then the other one that I tell people to practice is have their students practice what they would say during the different types of emergencies. So have them actually say, and of course you got Mayday and Pan are the two approved words. Realistically, all the emergencies that I've worked, pilots have just used plain language. We're declaring an emergency. That perks our ears up just as much. Say the other ones if you want to, because that is what the book says. That will also perk our ears up. But if you just say, Center Cessna 123, declaring an emergency, we've lost an engine, we're going to attempt a landing in the field below. Or our engine's running rough, where's the closest airport? Go through those different scenarios and actually have them say that a few different times. Have them practice that, because then when it comes time for them to do it, there's already a lot of stress for newer pilots to declare an emergency because they're afraid of the big bad FAA, right? In those emergency situations, we're actually here to help. We're going to coordinate whatever you need. If you need emergency equipment waiting at the airport, whether it's uncontrolled field, whether it's the big airport that actually has them on site, we're going to coordinate anything that you need, and we are there to help. So never be afraid to declare the emergency. But so that's the first hurdle they have to get past, is actually declaring it, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard pilots walk all the way around the word emergency trying to tell us what their problem is and not actually say it because they don't want to declare the emergency. Well, the other funny thing is I have the authority to declare the emergency on the pilot's behalf, and so does the flight company. So I've declared emergencies for pilots, and they didn't even know it. One of those type things. So awesome. They probably didn't even know it, because they probably never even had to file the report, because why would you have to file a report unless something didn't add up or something like that? So that's not my neck of the woods. That's more the FSDO side. But most of the time, we're just there to make sure you get on the ground safely and do what we can to help. So, but yeah, it all comes back to the muscle memory, because in the situation, it's easier for them to say what they've already practiced once they make that decision that it's time.
Well, yeah, and ultimately the other thing from a flight instructor side is that I have told students sometimes it's better to just say something, even if it's not proper phraseology, than to say nothing at all. If you're concerned about how you're going to say it and you get yourself into a worse problem because you didn't say something versus just saying, word vomit of this is what's happening, you're not doing yourself any favors. And I think that it's a good thing to hear someone like yourself from air traffic control say that's okay, right?
Yeah. We prefer plain language. It doesn't have to be exact. Yeah. I mean, just as long as we know what's going on, like I said, we're there to help.
Yeah.
So yeah, for the flight instructors, just have them practice those, like whatever the different emergency checklists are, have them practice one of those type things. Because I know when I went through training, they always had me, I would always tell them I'd notify air traffic control. That'd be the end of it. I never once actually practiced what I would actually say in that situation. So.
And having declared emergency myself, at least a couple times, I don't
happen more than what people think.
It does. And honestly, there is some comfort to it. Like, the controllers that I have worked with in those situations have been amazing controllers. Like they have, like, exactly like you said. I mean, they've said, hey, do you need help with this? Do you need help with that? We'll give you vectors. What do you need? Tell me what you need. And thankfully it's all come to a positive conclusion. And some of that comes back to you were able to help alleviate some of the workload for me, so that I could get through whatever it is that I needed to get through. I have a really good instructor friend of mine, and he says, if there's anything wrong, I declare emergency. Yep. Now, I'm not saying, don't dial 911 for no reason, right? But, it's better to declare it and get through whatever you need, no matter how minor it might be, than to not again and have a worse issue come through the situation. So,
that same naval aviator that I brought up before, when I was talking about one of the other stories that is in the book, but his point of view is anytime he's in the abnormal or emergency sections of the checklist, that's an automatic declared emergency.
That's a really good rule of thumb.
I thought, when he said that, I'm like, wow, that is awesome. I'm going to tell as many people I can about that, because I think that actually gives good hard guidelines to Part 91 pilots that don't have a set of SOPs requiring them to declare like a lot of the bigger companies do. So
why do you think, as a controller, why do you think that some of the pilots are so afraid to declare? Like you said, they'll dance around the emergency issue, but they won't say it. What do you think from your perspective? Where does that come from?
Well, I think it's pretty deep seated in the culture, to be honest with you. And there's a few reasons. First off, and probably one of the biggest reasons even today, how many air traffic controllers do you know? How many controllers have you been able to bounce ideas off of and stuff on a regular basis, unless you happen to be friends with one?
You're the second.
Overall, there you go. And you do this for a living, right?
Right.
So, I mean, there's only 14,000 of us nationwide, and we all work in buildings that I have a guard shack that I have to show my identification in. I have to scan my badge anytime I go in and out of the building. I mean, we are confined inside the fence essentially, right? And we have Operation Rain Check, but our staffing overall has been pretty poor over the recent years because we're still trying to recuperate from all the retirements. And you can only do so much training at a time. So we still have a few years of the staffing issue that's going on. But because of that, they haven't been doing the Operation Rain Check is what it's called, where pilots come in for tours.
That's what that's called. Okay.
Yeah, it's called Operation Rain Check. That does happen from time to time. But when staffing's low, it's just one of the first things that just falls off because it's an extracurricular activity essentially, right? So we don't get to cross paths with the pilots from a controller's point of view. So really and on top of that, controllers aren't pilots. The majority of them are. There are a few, and and a lot of them are very excellent pilots. And there's also flight instructors and stuff too. But overall, the group they're not pilots. So, and you don't have to be to do this job. We use radar and we give vectors, and we learn how the winds affect those turns and the different altitudes and stuff like that. That's the type of stuff that pilots don't need to know, right? So we are specialized in our job, you guys are specialized in your job, and even though they overlap, there's not much communication between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first one. The second one is, for many years, probably until about 10 years ago, I think, is the culture change in the FAA, where they're really trying to use data to make safety changes. So when you file the NASA reports, or the airline pilots, they have ASAP. Controllers now have ATSAP, is what we call it. And we actually, anytime that there's a safety issue, we go plug that in, and you may not hear anything back, but what it's doing is it's creating a database. And once they start seeing trends and stuff, they actually do make changes from that. So I highly always recommend filing the NASA reports as pilots, because that is a big deal. Never seems like it, but it helps a lot more than what people think. But it used to be, you screw up and all of a sudden you have a FSDO trying to take your certificate away.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the mindset that was for so many years, that I still believe it's part of the basic culture that's still there. And that's part of what I'm trying to do here, is to open up the communication between the two sides and say that it's not a bad thing to declare the emergency. We truly are here to help. We change everything from our side to help you, and not just coordinate the stuff, but we're going to move other airplanes out of your way. We're going to make life as easy as possible so you can remedy that situation as what it can be, versus the alternative of not even tell us about it, and then all of a sudden you end up crashing short of the runway.
Right.
So, I mean, but that, to me, that tends to be the big thing. But I know that culture has changed. So even if there is a pilot deviation that gets processed, if that FSDO thinks that you have learned your lesson from the situation and it was truly a mistake, or whatever the scenario was, their first step is to coach you through it and help you along. Now, from what I hear from the one friend that I have, I mean, if you're going in there, you're the know-it-all pilot, and you're basically just brushing them off and won't talk to them and stuff like that, well, then, yeah, they do have the authority to do a lot of things if they choose to. But if you're nice about it and you're actually sincere with trying to make sure it doesn't happen again, it really is more of a safety teaching culture now than it was to just take certificates away.
Attitude is everything, right?
It is. It really is.
Yeah. No, so it's interesting. I hate to focus on negatives, and I don't mean this as a negative, but I think it's where people are most interested. You mentioned pilot deviations, right?
Yep.
And you mentioned in the book that in your entire time as a ATC controller, you've only ever had to issue one deviation, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what pilots are so afraid of. That's where this, sometimes friction between pilots and controllers are, because we're out here going, oh my God, I made a mistake. Did they notice? Am I going to get a phone number? Am I going to get a letter in the mail? Like, right. Walk me through like how this works, and maybe try to put some of our listeners at ease. You mentioned something I had never heard of before in the book. You said there's something called a Brasher report, or Brasher code, or something.
Yep.
Tell me about what that is, and what should pilots know about this whole scary deviation thing?
Well, first and foremost, if we have to file a pilot deviation, that means that we have to file paperwork, right? And instead of me going out and taking a break and getting my head relaxed and for the next session, I'm doing paperwork. So at the end of the day, unless it's truly a bad thing, overall, the controllers I know, and I tend to do the same way, if there's no harm, no foul, I tend to not say a word.
But we're not giving license for people to screw up on purpose.
No, definitely don't do that. And one of the stories I tell in the book, the one that I did turn in, I mean, it was malicious of what it was. He was blatantly disregarding our instructions. Well, at that point, guess what? I'm sorry, that's on you. And if there's ever a loss of separation, they're going to do their investigation. And if it was a controller that was bad, that was wrong, then the FAA will handle that in their manner. If the pilot caused a loss of separation due to a deviation, that 100% of the time will always be filed and get the FSDO involved with that. That's out of our hands. But yeah, so I mean, those are some of the situations, but as long as you're trying to do the right thing, mistakes happen. Everybody knows it. We're all human. Controllers are human. Pilots are human. We get that. But as long as you're trying to do the right thing, overall, it's not going to be, it's usually not it usually doesn't end bad in those circumstances. Now, with that, so basically the Brasher warning that you're talking about is we have the FAA, the controllers have to tell a pilot, possible pilot deviation advised upon arrival, you call whatever facility you're at and they give you the phone number, right? That's to allow you to get your mind wrapped around it. And if you want to write down stuff on your iPads now, not even kneeboards, but however you want to do to kind of get yourself prepared for that conversation and to deal with it later. That is what that Brasher warning is all about. Now, I had a situation where I was wanting the FSDO, that aircraft had already done landed, and there was some miscommunication. The pilot was upset. I understood why he was upset from what he said, but when I went back and listened to the tapes, he didn't say what he was telling me he said. So the controllers had no idea what he was actually looking for. So I was hoping that the FSDO would actually go just have a conversation with him, because it is the safety culture. But because I didn't issue that Brasher warning, they wouldn't even accept it. They wouldn't even have that conversation. So theoretically, not saying in all situations, but theoretically, if you're not issued the Brasher warning while you're flying, or if you land and they call the facility, because they can do that too, if shortly after you land, of, hey, give us a call back, give them the message type thing, then, but I mean, that's pretty rare. So if they don't issue the Brasher warning while you're in flight, 9 times out of 10, nothing's ever going to come from it.
So there's a meme out there that is used quite a bit, and it's a picture of Kermit the Frog looking out a window, and it's raining outside, and he's kind of got one hand up and he's looking a little sad. And I've seen it for things like, I wonder if my bad landing's still thinking about me too. And I sort of equate it to, like, I wonder if ATC noticed I busted altitude by 200 feet. Like, they didn't say anything, but I'm now here and I'm wide awake at midnight trying to sleep, thinking about, like, oh my God, did they notice? So what you're basically saying is, for the most part, and there's certain exceptions to any rule, but if you don't tell me, like, hey, you screwed up, everything's okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Now, with that altitude thing, air traffic's not even going to know if you're in the center most of the time, because of how we type everything in at the center. That's why if you ever hear typing in the background when the controller's talking, we're literally talking and typing at the same time. So if I tell you to climb to flight level 330, I'm typing that in. It depends on how I assign that. If it's a temporary altitude, like if you request flight level 360, but I'm only taking the top of my stratum up to 330, it'll show me to the 100 altitudes where you're at. But if you're at your assigned altitude, 360 in that example, if you're within 300 feet, my computer system's going to show you as level. Now, the radars used at the TRACONs, at the approach controls, they don't type things in. They still write on strips. Okay. So that will show everything there to the 100 altitude. But yeah, if you're level at cruise at the center, we don't even know unless you bust 300 feet.
Oh, okay.
So,
and let's say something like that does happen. Again, I'm sort of airing my own dirty laundry here, but if people can learn from my mistakes, then I'm okay with it. There have been times as a flight instructor, as a training captain for my former company, you're flying with new pilots, either new to the airplane or just new in general. And sometimes they do things that you don't catch, or it happens so quickly that, by the time you catch it and fix it, it's already happened. Right. And let's say a friend of mine may have gone up by 1,000 or 2 that they weren't supposed to. And, thankfully, in this particular case, the controller working with my friend was just like, hey, what altitude are you guys at? And, I think we had thought, he had thought that they had said this particular altitude. And the controller said, no, I said this one. And we said, well, we repeated back that one. It was sort of that 2 and tree sort of thing. Thankfully, they didn't give us any hard time. Is that purely because there were no other airplanes in the way? Is that how we got away with it?
Yeah. Because if there's a loss of separation, that's always going to be followed up. Okay. And in the center environment, that's 1,000 feet above or below, or 5 miles laterally. Okay, that's what it is. There's ADSBs allowing certain, like up to flight level 230 to be down to 3 miles, which is what the TRACONs use. But as a hard fast rule at the center, 1,000 feet, 5 miles.
Got it.
Once again, that's a no harm, no foul situation.
So yeah, again, I mean, it's interesting to hear this perspective. I mean, we're not trying to give people loopholes as to ways of doing things they're not supposed to and still get away with it. But at the same time, you know, there's this understanding of like, there is some tolerances. If you need it, hopefully you won't, but if you did,
we're human, so mistakes happen.
Yeah. So what other stories would you like to highlight from the book, or even mention? Like what kinds of things do you think stand out as sort of the I mean, they're all great, but what are your other sort of highlight ones?
You know, there's just a ton of stories. I mean, there's multiple stories for each chapter. I got 32 chapters plus the appendices at the end. The one appendix is the phraseology appendix, where I actually go through and talk about the phraseology to practice and to use and all that kind of stuff. And I actually go through an example as to the big with request, center Cessna 123 with request. There's absolutely zero reason to use that. And I tell you good techniques to use because I don't want you to just to list a whole mouth of the diarrhea of the mouth type thing. But if you think about it, that is an absolute waste of breath. Center Cessna 123 with request. Center Cessna 123 say request. Cessna 123, we'd like to climb to 5,000. Okay, climb to 5,000. If you get rid of those first two transmissions, that saves everybody time. Now, if you're looking for approaches and you're wanting multiple approaches, just say that. Approach Cessna 123, looking for multiple practice approaches, starting off with the ILS under runway 9 or whatever. And okay, well, at that point, I as a controller know this isn't going to, you're not full stop. And I will get back to you because some controllers want the whole laundry list right away. Other controllers want you to tell me what your next one is on the go. So it all does it. So the whole with request thing, I know that's taught in several places. I used to use it myself, but man, what a waste of time when things are busy.
Right.
So, because if you can get yourself set up to make your communications nice, good, clear, and concise when things are slow, that's going to make things much easier for everybody involved when things are busy. And even if a controller is busy, you're still, if you're able to do that, you're going to be able to still get your practice approaches where if you're talking too much and on every single transmission, I'm not going to have time for that if I'm too busy, because practice approaches do not have to be accommodated. We do a pretty good job at accommodating them, but they don't have to be accommodated if we're too busy. So that Appendix A is the over phraseology that it goes over a lot of that type of stuff.
Well, this is all great stuff. I appreciate the perspective on this. I've got sort of one last question for you as we wind down, and maybe you know the answer to this, maybe you don't.
Okay.
Where in the world did the SIA thing come from? You know what I'm talking about? Where a controller says, all right, you know, you're exiting my airspace, maintain 2,000 feet and contact so-and-so and so. SIA! Where does that come from?
I don't know. I do talk about the what I call the cool, I'm a cool pilot voice. I'm sure you've heard it, where the guy's sitting there talking in the deepest voice possible and all that kind of stuff.
I've never done that before.
I know. We and the answer is yes, we are laughing at those people. So, but yeah, I have no idea. Just get bored, I guess.
Yeah, I've always wondered where that came from, because they used to do it at the tower that I learned at in Battle Creek, Michigan.
Okay.
And I thought it was just a Battle Creek thing. I thought it was just the controllers were having fun.
Also, the controllers doing it, not the pilots.
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, the pilots started doing it because the controllers were doing it, but
yeah.
You know, they would do that, and I thought it was just sort of, that's what they do because they train and they've got so many people in the pattern. They just want to have a little bit of fun. Yeah. And then as I started sort of traveling the country, I started hearing it in multiple places, and sometimes it was tower, sometimes it was approach, sometimes it was even, you know, center. And I was curious if there's like something you learn in ATC school that's like, you know what, every so often just throw in a SIA.
Bottom line is we get bored. That's all I have for that one. So I don't know. But when it's not busy, we get bored.
Yeah, no, I get it. So Andy, for those that are wondering about this book, where would they go to pick one up?
You can go to the website atcbook.com. So
atcbook.com.
atcbook.com.
And folks, you can see a picture in Andy's background there, but I have one right here. And I enjoy it. I'm going to finish it. I encourage you to go to, you said atcbook.com.
atcbook.com.
Go to atcbook.com, get one. Andy, you were kind enough to mention the National Association of Flight Instructors in your book. We as an organization appreciate that. We appreciate what you're doing. And sort of sharing the knowledge and the safety culture is something that we are very fond of. And your time here has been greatly appreciated. Any final thoughts? Anything else you want to mention before we say goodbye?
Nope. The reason why I put you guys in the book is because I appreciate everything that you guys are doing to enhance safety for everybody out there, and appreciate your time as well.
Well, folks, once again, thanks to Andy for joining us today. Thank you for listening. If you like the podcast, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or any of the other places that you may be listening. Subscribe if you could, and we'll have more content for you in 2 weeks. So thank you so much.